Hello and welcome to our CGTN TV forum, Vision for China, South Korea, Japan Trilateral Cooperation. I'm Zoe in Beijing. As the challenges to global political and economic order rise, is the global economic engine still running? What are the biggest problems we face? And together we have gathered some guests from Japan, South Korea, and China to talk about those issues and look for some answers. And I'd like to remind you the TV forum is also part of the official agenda of the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity 2020. And in Beijing, I'm honored to introduce the guest here, Mr. Zhu Guangyao, China former Vice Finance Minister, and also Yao Yang, Dean of the National School of Development at Peking University, and Mr. Xiao Geng is the Chairman of the Hong Kong Institution for International Finance. And my co-host in Tokyo is Kay.
Hello, Zoe. Hello to you from Tokyo. And here we have an honored guest, Professor Akiko Yamanaka. Professor Yamanaka is the former Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs for Japan. Welcome, Professor Yamanaka.
Thank you.
And back to you, Zoe.
And Kei Shimutsu is visiting scholar of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you, Kei. And next is Eugene. Eugene is the Associate Professor at the Division of the International Studies from Kunji National University. Eugene.
Hello. Very glad to join this wonderful program. Trilateral cooperation among East Asian countries now really needs a new vision in this era when the conventional security concerns like North Korea's nuclear threat still exist, and at the same time, non-conventional security concerns like public health issues, environmental destruction, and the cybersecurity still exist at the same time. So today, I'm very glad to have another panelist here in the studio, Professor Song Soo-young, who is now teaching at the Department of Finance at Chung-Hang University. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me at this precious moment of the forum, and I'd like to make any meaningful contribution.
Thank you, Eugene. As COVID has triggered global disruptions to our economy, where we are now as a world. Let's take a look. China, Japan, and South Korea. The regional triangle is geographically close and culturally linked, with complicated rivalries over history and territorial claims. Still, economy and trade remain their biggest bond. As Asia's top three economies, they represent a quarter of the world economy, with a market of more than 1.5 billion people. As the spread of COVID-19 triggers global economic disruption, leaders in the three countries are calling for further cohesion and cooperation. Will business opportunities and closer exchanges help overcome geopolitical differences? How far away is China-Japan ROK Trilateral Free Trade Agreement? And can the momentum of regional integration in Northeast Asia triumph over a growing anti-globalization sentiment around the world? As COVID-19 has triggered disruptions to global economy, where we are now as a world. Let's take a look.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address you virtually as part of today's timely CGTN TV forum, Vision for China, Japan, Republic of Korea Trilateral Trade. We are currently living through a period of converging crises and unprecedented challenges that have upended the international order and ushered in a new era of global unpredictability and risk. The converging global challenges of both today and tomorrow and their ramifications on the economic and political spheres in East Asia necessitates closer cooperation between China, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. This is ever more important as a trade protectionism, anti-globalization sentiment, and challenges to the multilateral system and international organizations are increasing and often emanating from their greatest historical benefactors. In this regard, I believe that it is now high time to build on the trilateral progress that has been made from 2003 to 2011 during the joint study, as well as during the 16 rounds of trilateral FTA negotiations since 2012, to finally expedite decisive action on the China, Japan, Korea CJK FTA negotiations. Or CJK FTA is not the regional panacea that will suddenly make our historical issues or elements of distrust go away. But it does offer a new way forward. And there is momentum to forge ahead with this goal now, particularly as all three countries have recently agreed to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP, which is slated to be signed in the coming weeks. The benefits to doing so expediently are vast. Indeed, our economies are already increasingly interconnected in terms of our trade, supply chains, tourism, investment, and technology. We need global solutions born from active and forward-thinking collaboration across borders, with East Asia leading the way and driving new solutions underpinned with the cooperation, peace, and co-prosperity for all. I thank you all for your targeted efforts to this end. Thank you.
China, South Korea, and Japan have been pretty successful in containing COVID. But of course, like many countries around the world, they also face domestic and international challenges. Now let's come to our discussions here in Beijing. So Vice Minister Zhu, China is recovering economically, that's the good news. But also we are facing an uphill battle as the Chinese Communist Party just convened its gathering and map out the plan for the next 5 years and 15 years. What are the major challenges?
So this year, the whole globe facing the big challenge by COVID-19 pandemic. It has triggered public health crisis in the whole world. Also, deep recession economic in every country at the beginning of this year. And we also should pay attention to the international governance crisis triggered. So we can see the public health crisis, economic recession, plus international governance crisis made country in difficult position and the whole world in difficult position. How to deal with the challenge we never seen after World War II. I think that's most important is every country should have strong policy guidance to deal with the challenge of pandemic. Also, there's need global solidarity to deal with the challenge the human being of whole world faced. In China, under the strong leadership by Communist Party, President Xi Jinping as a core of leadership, we do pay a lot of effort as fourth quarter this year contain the virus spread. We paid a lot of cost. Economic situation in fourth quarter is negative 6.8%. That's negative situation we never seen for 40 years reform and opening up period.
But this is still the best growth in the world.
Yes. However, after we contained virus spread, the economic situation gradually become better. The second quarter, we had 3.2% positive growth. The third quarter is 4.9% growth, and the fourth three quarter as a whole, 0.7% growth in China. IMF forecast Chinese economy this year is 1.9%, and the World Bank forecast is 2% of positive growth Chinese economy. I believe the final result should be better than the international organization estimate. But as you said, we just have very important meeting, and that's make up the blue map for next 5 years development. Also had the general direction for 2035 to establish China in the basically modernize the socialist economy and the socialist country. That will be more emphasize people's living standard improving. And we will let every ordinary people to enjoy the better life. This is our goal. Now, end of this year, certainly China will reach the goal of human being society and get rid of poverty reduction.
I want to talk about China's response in particular, Professor Yao. What we call dual circulation or double development dynamic, which is to rely both on the domestic economic cycle and the international cycle. What do you make of this policy, and how can we balance the two?
Well, over the last 10 years, Chinese economy has already gone back more toward the domestic economy, a so-called internal circulation, right? But right now, the international environment is not that stable. I think this turn is going to boost more domestic economy, and then the emphasis is to reach, in some key areas, technological autonomy inside China. I think that's very critical facing the unstable international environment.
But does that mean that we will rely on ourselves technologically across the board?
In some key area, yes, but we still maintain an open environment. That's very important. That's still the most efficient way for China to upgrade its technology. I think the only challenge for China is that the American government is trying to slow down China's technological upgrading.
And Professor Xiao, of course, it's very important for businesses to plan for the future as government policies might shift towards a consumption-driven, technology-driven economy. What are the priorities for both long-term and short-term plans?
Well, I think in the short run, both government and the business are trying to focus on how to restore the economy, because globally there are tremendous uncertainties about when the economy will be fully restored. But domestically, because of the tensions with the U.S., supply chains are fragmented. Yeah. So some of these areas needs to really motivate our own domestic circulation systems to supplement that. But I think over the longer term, I think China's main objective is to modernize its country, and very important to grow together with the global economy, with the rest of the other world. So in that sense, China is trying to modernize its institutions so that it would be more compatible, with the world. I think that's a big challenge right now, because of a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of conflicts in national security area. Yeah.
All right. And Kay, these are some of the perspectives from China. What are the Japanese economists and decision makers thinking right now?
Yes, thank you, Zoya. As you know, we have recently had a change in leadership, and our new Prime Minister Suga and his cabinet are looking for ways to revive the Japanese economy. So I'd like to turn to our guest here, Professor Yamanaka. What are Japan's top priorities now, especially in terms of economic development?
At this moment in Japan, the most important thing is protect lives. So that is the first one. And then we have to review the supply chain. That means come back to the basic self-sufficient life, medical protecting clothing, medical device, as well as medicines and vaccines should be supplied within the country as much as possible. But of course, it's not really enough, so we have to have a kind of regional network. But I think that we should make an effort for that. And I think that the third difficult thing is the severe business. For example, passenger transport industry like airlines or train company, bus company, hires, taxis, and all those ones together with tourism. I think that we three countries can really share this concept and can work together for the future of this stability and happiness of this region.
Thank you so much, Professor Yamanaka. And back to you, Zhou in Beijing.
Well, thank you very much, Kay. And South Korea was also among the first to be affected by COVID, but now it is on its road to recover its economy and normal life. So, Eugene, what is the South Korean perspective on economic reconstruction?
Now we have heard the challenges and the potential solution prescriptions for the Chinese case and the Japanese case. And for the South Korean case, I'd love to ask to our guest, Professor Song. So Professor Song, so South Korea's economic recovery, for that, what kind of challenges do we have ahead? And then what would you like to recommend or ask for government or for industry, for any major player to address these problems?
At first, the Korean economy has suffered from the outbreak of pandemic. However, we have successfully contained the outspread and limited the number of the patients who has contracted the coronavirus. Then we have witnessed some recovery of the economic behavior and activities, particularly in with the help from the economic positive growth in China and also in United States. Then we have recorded a very unprecedented growth rate of the export. So that is the driving force behind the last quarter recovery of the Korean economy. However, now the U.S. and other countries have suffered from another outbreak of the pandemic, and also still China is working very good. But however, the prospect is a little bit, particularly the international global trade is very weak. So for South Korea, as the Yamanaka has mentioned earlier, we need to focus on the within, and also some Discover South Korea would help particularly for the medium and the small enterprise and some self-employed individuals to survive. Then with the backup of the fiscal expansion, particularly for the loss of the income. So otherwise we lack in the demand and the consumption, then we cannot maintain the current status of the economic recovery further. So that is the biggest challenge. Also, particularly in this moment, in this forum, the trilateral trade agreement between these three countries is quite important, because I expect the globalization that is expected to continue in the upcoming next decade would be a little bit different from the previous globalization that has taken place in the last 3 decades. So to that regard, the regional cooperation would be imperative and essential.
That's true. Yes, back to you, Mr. Zhou.
Well, thank you, Eugene. Of course, the global pandemic has reshaped regional economies around the world. But the problem is, can we rise up to the challenge? And our keynote speakers have this to say.
It is a great pleasure to be joining the CGTN TV Forum. I am Pansy Ho, a long-term investor in tourism and transportation within the Greater Bay Area of China. 2020 has been an extremely challenging year for the world with the outbreak of COVID-19. IMF estimated that global growth is standing at -4.9%. As we all know, China, Japan, and Korea have always been close partners in tourism. Last year, Japan and Korea received 10 million and 6 million Chinese visitors respectively, which contributed to a third of inbound travelers to both countries. A revival in international visitation would definitely be significant economic stimulus. More importantly, just last August, a trilateral memorandum was signed by the tourism and cultural ministries of the three countries to reaffirm further strengthening collaboration, while governments lead and direct tourism policies. The engine behind tourism development is the private sector, and the two must work together in solid public-private partnerships. Over the past 20 years, Macau took the opportunity of its return to China and transformed itself into a truly world-class integrated destination. Its openness and strong appetite for novel attractions also make it the best testing ground for new ideas, with Japan as a front-runner in cutting-edge technology and South Korea as a powerhouse in entertainment. Our competitive strengths are highly complementary to one another. Tourism is an interesting industry where our success depends on one another, and where there are no true competitors but only partners. Given our close proximity and shared goals in sustainable regional developments, I sincerely hope to see more regional collaborations with Japan and South Korea in the future.
And our next keynote speaker is from Tokyo, Japan.
Well, I'm very happy. Economically, the three countries are strongly dependent on each other. That is true not only with manufacturing, but also with tourism. There are several reasons why we should focus attention particularly on tourism. First, restarting tourism sends a message both domestically and internationally that COVID-19 has been overcome. Second, tourism helps to ease political tensions such as that existing between Japan and South Korea. For example, in the world of music and animation, young people in these countries enjoy each other's culture regardless of national borders. The people in the three countries have a similar attitude to tourism. Third, tourism promotes economic growth in three countries, and that will contribute to the revitalization of global economy. As you know, next year, the postponed Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo will be held. There will be no problem with Chinese and South Korean athletes coming to Japan to compete in the event and tourists coming to watch the games. Japan will do its utmost to hold the games successfully, but support from China and South Korea will be very helpful. If our three countries cooperate in holding the Tokyo Olympics and the Paralympics successfully, that will strengthen their political relationships and help to resolve various pending political issues. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, China, South Korea, Japan are closely linked economically. They are interdependent in trade and value chain distributions. But my next question to our Japanese guest, Ms. Yamanaka, of course, they are not without problems. For example, the fractured relationship between South Korea and Japan in terms of the trade restrictions. So what do you think might be the priorities if they want to be better integrated economically?
In order to work together, the trust is very, very important. So I think we have to open our eye and have to look at the history and look at the issues which Japan has with Korea, and Japan has with China, and China has with where. So all those things we have to open our eyes, but sometimes we have to close one eye and have to work together. So we need two eyes to open up and not forget about the history, but sometimes at this moment to close one eye in order to work together. So I hope that we should appreciate and also make trust. That's most important basic thing.
Thank you, Professor Yamanaka. I think I get to now ask a question to Professor Song over in Seoul, Korea. Politics and economics go hand in hand, and just as Professor Yamanaka just mentioned, especially in Asia, where the state plays a significant role in economic policy making. But political disagreements in the past have had somewhat of a negative impact on both trilateral and bilateral relationships in the region. And so what can be done, in your opinion, to lessen the impact of economic cooperation in the region going forward?
Yeah, particularly the political relationship between Japan and South Korea is very quite a negative, has been negative because of the recent history which under the Korean experience as a colony from Japan. So Japan has, I asked Japan to be open-minded and then at least make some sincere apology for the colonization of Korea, and then based upon that acknowledgement, we could build up a mutual trust with the help, as the Professor Yamanaka has mentioned, the domestic tourism and the international tourism between those two countries could be improved and could help build up the mutual trust between those two countries, and then extending those relationships with China and between these three countries. Among these three countries, we could have some regional stability and economic prosperity. As I mentioned earlier, because of the globalization for the upcoming decades would be quite different from the globalization that has taken place in the past 3 decades under the guidance of the United States. But most scholars and economists have predicted the world globalization, as long as it is resumed again, that it could have a different phase, such as some European Union region and American bloc, and then East Asian or including South Asian blocs would be the most likely to be some three domains in which the trade and economic activities focus on. The reason is because of because of the coronavirus, and we have experienced some disruptive supply chain. So the offshoring or foreign direct investment would be reduced, I expect. Therefore, as a result, the closer ties among the countries would be increased, and then that could help foster some economic and political connection and the economic prosperity among the blocs, within the blocs, particularly for the, so to that regard, I think today is the trilateral relationship among these three countries would be a pivotal moment to facilitate and expedite some progress in the future.
Now I'd like to ask another question to the Dean Yao Yang, which is about another player who is not actually a member of this region, again, the United States. So Dean Yao Yang, so what kind of measures do you think U.S. will take to place some pressure, especially on a high-tech cooperation among the three countries, South Korea, Japan, and China?
Well, the American approach to tech restrictions on China has been really detrimental to this region's economy. We know that the regional high-tech network is so tightly connected. You know, the production center is in China. You look at the suppliers, they are in Japan, they are in South Korea. So if China's high-tech production stops, then the whole region is affected. The American policy toward China is mostly, I actually describe it as a Tonya Harding strategy, right? You know, Tonya Harding was a figure skater in the 1990s. And she took this really wrong approach with her competitor, right? She hired a guy to lock her competitor anchor, right? But she ended up in jail. The United States is doing exactly the same thing. It's hurting China, but in the meantime, it's hurting herself.
If the U.S. is hell-bent to divulge itself from China, what should be South Korea and Japan be thinking? Will it band with China and Japan, which is economic link and geographic close, or should it be band with the U.S., which is an ally?
Oh, well, I think in the end, the economics rules, right? So if the American ban on China hurts China, that's going to hurt Japanese companies and Korean companies. I think that the integration of this region is critical to maintain a sound and a robust production network in this region.
All right. As we have just seen, the disruption of globalization around the world mean different things probably to China, South Korea, and Japan. Will they cooperate? Let's hear another keynote speaker.
Globalization is now in trouble. Free trading system, which we benefited greatly during the post-war period, is now in reverse gear. Multilateral system, including the United Nations, is going through a very difficult time. Public opinion is also shifting away from globalization. COVID-19 compound the problem of globalization. Under this international situation, what should China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea do? Let me just name 4 areas of future cooperation. I think this is very necessary. One is COVID-19. We have to work very closely to overcome the imminent issue of health crisis caused by the coronavirus, COVID-19. 3 countries are doing much better than the rest of the world. We have to be united to relay some of our experience to other countries so that the world can live more in healthy situation. Second one is climate change. Unless the concentration of greenhouse gas is stabilized, the world's climate system will be further destabilized. We have to work hard to reduce the carbon dioxide, to change the paradigm of growth from the quantitative to qualitative growth, that is green growth, and also even pursue for the cooperation of a hydrogen economy, which is now becoming very fashionable. Third issue would be disaster risk reduction. The world is full of natural disasters, from typhoons, hurricanes, cyclones, flood, earthquake, and so on. East Asia is another exception. We have to work very hard together to reduce the disaster risk and share the good practices of how to build back better after the disasters. Lastly, we are going through the rapid digital transformation, so-called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The 3 countries are far advanced in digital transformation, and number of internet users of 3 countries are numbered like more than 1 billion people. We are far advanced than other regions in digital technology, including ABCDI, AI and deep learning, blockchain, cloud, data, Internet of Things, robotics, drones, 3D printing, and so on. This is one major area where 3 countries can be united to work together to promote digital transformation at home, as well as transfer some of our technologies to other countries in the future. Thank you.
Former South Korean Prime Minister raised a very important point. And Kay, I want to ask you for your take on this. Is East Asian community a viable idea? Some say, well, COVID is a black swan event. It divided a lot of economies, but can it also unite economies? What's your take?
Thank you, Zoya, for that question. I think it certainly can unite Asia. As you mentioned at the very beginning of this forum, our three countries, South Korea, China, and Japan, have been so fortunate to be able to relatively contain this pandemic relative to especially Western Europe and of course the United States. And so this gives us a little more room to maximize our efforts towards economic recovery under joint cooperation in a regional manner. And really together, these three countries consist of about 15% of the world's GDP, roughly the equivalent of the United States. So there should be significant confidence in this region that mutual cooperation will really lead to a potential big contribution to global economic recovery. And so I think that this pandemic is also giving us an opportunity to really push forward mutual cooperation. But of course, the big elephant in the room is the United States. And so I'd like to throw the question now over to Zhu Guangyao, although in Beijing. The US has just concluded a rather tumultuous presidential election. And how, under this situation, can China tackle in the long term economic recovery and regional stability while China's relationship with the US remain uncertain?
Relationship between China and the United States. Since a long time, I joined the economic dialogue with the U.S. team. I also highly respect the colleagues of U.S. team. And during the negotiation, both sides is representing each country's interest. Certainly, for me, for Chinese team, we will formally protect Chinese interest. U.S. also have their interest and debate. And even confrontation is normal. However, another principle is mutual respect. China is the largest developing country. United States is the largest developed country. Both countries with very big complementary room to work together. Question is whether can be real respect each other. That's basic principle. And based on mutual respect, and we can work together even through debate and sometimes very unhappy conflict. But finally, we should have the final result to get win-win result, win-win situation. This not only for Chinese and American interests, that's interest of whole global, that's global peace and development need China and the US back to the normal track through negotiation frankly and to back to the right track. And as a regional cooperation, I do believe China, Japan, Korea cooperation will not only benefit our region, also can benefit global cooperation, particularly for regional financial cooperation. This year, indeed, with big challenge by COVID-19 pandemic. However, I would like very happy to report, in this very difficult situation, we found in Qingmai Initiative multilateralization had fundamental development. And the finance minister and the central bank governors of China, Japan, Korea, and the ASEAN countries agreed to make more flexible to use Qingmai Initiative multilateralization, including that the link with IMF portion from 30% to 40%, and also agree based on voluntary need and demand, use local currencies in this very important program. I do believe such kind of development is very fundamental. It demonstrates real cooperation in our region, and I appreciate very much the contribution by Japan, by Korea, and also our ASEAN countries. Myself, in 1998, joined the efforts to create Qingmai Initiative. I do understand how difficult then in that time. But now, after 10 years development, we really have trust, and we really have very close working mechanism. That's very, very important. And also, I strongly expect China, Japan, Korea free trade zone negotiation will progress the more. And also our three countries to make our joint efforts to make sure RCEP can be finally closed and signed by our leaders.
And that should be a vision, good news for the rest of the world as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Zhu. And thank you, Kay. Talking about the COVID, so Eugene, some people would argue there are also cultural elements behind the success of China, South Korea, and Japan in containing COVID. So what is your vision of trilateral cooperation post-COVID?
Sure. I really enjoyed today's discussion. As our other panelists already mentioned, East Asian countries have been relatively successful in terms of containing the COVID pandemic. There are many probably factors that contributed to relative success, but one thing probably we need to remember is our culture. And of course, we live in a freer, more liberal, more individualistic society, relatively speaking, compared to before. But at the same time, in East Asian countries, we share some kind of community-oriented culture, I think, which is very, very important, especially for the era of this kind of, again, the crisis. So hopefully, we need to respect this kind of commonality, good commonality of our culture, which is one thing I want to highlight. And at the same time, the flip side of that is, again, we should definitely avoid unnecessarily escalation of nationalism, which is a big temptation, actually, for any elected leader, especially in the democratic society. I understand how the dynamics goes like that, but which is super dangerous and offensive sometimes to our neighbors and their people. So definitely our political leadership should be more cautious about their remarks or their any statement for their people, and even for the people of other countries as well. We definitely need to avoid it. And having said that, as the last focal point, I would like to suggest that all three countries, we really need to focus on real regional issues which are directly related to our people's everyday life, like air pollution or sea pollution. Professor Yamanaka, our Japanese honorable guest, she already mentioned about all this importance of preventive diplomacy for the real regional issue. So I think we can definitely do that, and every leadership should really respect and appreciate each other's effort for further cooperation. Now my question will go to Chairman Xiao Gang. So in the past, external forces have sometimes intervened and triggered various troubles when this regional cooperation was going smoothly and even growing. So what can and should be done to avoid this kind of thing happen again, or at least minimize any disruptions? Chairman Xiao Gang, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I think we all know that after Second World War, the U.S. played an extremely important role in get our region developed. And we should all thank U.S. for that. But now I think the world is moving into a multipolar situation. Europe and particularly Asia, we are actually doing pretty well. Particularly, I think in the relationship between the government and the market, and also in setting regional standards. And for Europe, it's actually setting the global standards. So I think in the future, we should actually focus more on people, on sustainable growth, and also should think about how we can develop really global rules, not just disrupted frequently by some other external influences. I think if we focus on people, focus on sustainability, and the global peace, we actually can set the example. I think during this pandemic, this region actually did a lot of things. We learned from each other. We developed a very effective non-pharmacological, interventions. So those things which I think should become the global standards. I think after we have this confidence, after we have this practical success, then I think in the future, this region can actually play more important role, not only for ourselves, but also for the rest of the world.
I want to pin down on this question about rules. Why there is dispute between China and the United States is they have different understandings about rules and even different standards about rules. How can different countries come to the same page talking about the rules that apply to everybody? Can Asia set an example for the rest of the world? Of course, we consider ourselves a bunch of different countries and cultures.
I think Asia in the past learned tremendously from Europe, from the US, and then we understand each other because of culture, because of geography, we understand each other very well. So that's why we actually, I think, should be able to develop very good rules for our region first, and then gradually, being accepted by the rest of the world. And I think Europe has been doing this extremely successful. Europe has set a lot of, corporate governance, sustainability, climate change, all the rules. And the US sometimes the views. But I think if Europe, Asia, we all accept, I think eventually American people would actually, accept. So I think the politics in the U.S., I see it as transitory. U.S. has 200 years of very successful, miracle, right? So this right now is chaotic, which we have to wait and see. But eventually, if we focus on people, especially focus on future generations, our kids, our kids, then I think we should be able to success in actually contributing more.
Mr. Zhu, I think you must understand this, because you just said 10 years ago the Qingmai Initiative pushing forward was very difficult, but now there are different mechanisms and incentives for the stakeholders. How can we create synergy between different partners to agree on rules and follow through?
Yeah, that's because that's firstly, we need time and need real progress to establish trust. And trust establishment not just one night. And that's hard work, and that's need real efforts. So each side should show that's real desire and sincerity to others, because we have this common goal. We want regional development. That's our common goal. Based on that, and we can handle the difference in each side. And secondly, you must be direct face the problem, not avoid problem. To find the problem and try use a constructive way to solve that. And then the third point is really mutual benefit. And the final should be benefit ordinary people and to get the domestic support. All countries have each country's domestic politics, but the basic line is ordinary people support.
I want to ask our Japanese guest, Ms. Yamanaka, you earlier mentioned trust. Of course, trust is basic to make any deals or establish any rules, but what is your assessment? Why there is a deficit of it, and what can Asian countries do to reestablish trust?
Thank you very much for your very important question. History did not give Japan to choose either US or China or whatever. That's why Japan has to be a kind of balancer between US and China. This is my feeling. But as a regional member, we can do a lot together. The first thing is ensuring social resilience, because the keynote speaker mentioned about the increasing of the natural disasters. That's why we have to consider how to ensure the resilience of society from humans to infrastructure, that we can work together. And also addressing common interests. If on the global stage, only strong win the economic negotiations, and that means no one will really win, because we are so much complicated, interconnected world, so no one is going to survive. So we have to think about the common interest. And the third one, last one, that I really would like to put the focus on is we have to establish the age of balance. That is not only just a individual level, but state level and international level as well. For example, development and environment protection, globalization, regionalization, and high-tech information and international individual privacy, global orientation, individualism, leisure, work, male, female, military solution, non-military solution, and even national interest and international interest, in other words, common interest. And as I told you that Japan was not given a hand to choose either the United States or China, but I'm happy to introduce a word of past professor of the economics of Harvard University, Professor Galbraith. He mentioned to me when I met, when he was still alive, of course, Akiko, the US and Japan have succeeded to produce excellent products. However, it is doubtful if we have succeeded to produce real happy people. So I hope from this region, the China, Korea, Japan, and in the future, DPRK, Mongolia, from this region, we hope that we can work together to produce real happy people. I thank you.
Very insightful points. I want, Mr. Song, you weigh in on this. Balance. How do you balance different initiatives and agendas, domestic and international, environment and economic progress? I think South Korea is also facing the same problem. How do you deal with your trade disputes with China, with Japan, and your own international interests?
Yeah, because Korean economy, particularly South Korean economy, has depended upon the international trade, and almost the export to trade take more than half percentage of our GDP. So to that regard, the South Korean economy is relatively vulnerable to the disruption of international trade. So that's why our government emphasized this, try to work as some mediator sometimes, even though we fall short of our ability and the capability, but we rely too much on the international trade. That's why we would like to make the peaceful situation and minimize the risk of the war or some nuclear threat from North Korea. So we would like to, we have, domestically, we have our initiative, particularly to promote our domestic demand, but always we have to consider international context. Otherwise, we are going to be very vulnerable. Therefore, the minimization of the political risk would be the most essential part to make the economy and build up the trust among the countries surrounding us, such from China and Japan, even North Korea. Yamanaka has just mentioned including the Mongolia in the and the build up the trust and the cooperation within this region is very essential, very important. So I fully agree with that idea, and then we have to take into account of the presence of North Korea and to make, for example, the truce, the temporary truce should be converted into permanent ceasefire, and we have to guarantee some political stability and the peaceful process within this region. That would be very important to reinvigorate and to stabilize the economic prosperity among the countries that could help build up our trust among the people in different countries, and that could help retain some trust and among the countries in this area.
Mr. Yao, I want to ask China's case. Of course, we also have our balances to make, how to advance our economy and also provide some international good for the international community, how to balance the quality and the quantity of growth. Do you think China and South Korea and Japan share some values of being moderate, of doing a balancing act in this?
Certainly, yeah. All three countries actually share some cultural commonalities, right? So as our panelists have already stated, our culture has some core element that is to respect other people and also to respect the order. I think that's very important. If we can bring this to the international stage, I think we can make a contribution, for example, to respect each other, right? To live and to let live. I think that's going to be good for to build a new global order, right? So definitely we can make a contribution.
All right, thank you very much. Well, obviously, despite all the differences, the capacity for reconciliation and cooperation is a big piece of the puzzle for the trilateral cooperation between the three countries. Kay?
Thank you so much for this opportunity to join all of you panelists in both Korea and China and also talk about the need for mutual trust, which I'd just like to echo in conclusion. And in particular, the fact that mutual trust can only be built if each country takes responsibility for their own domestic needs. And in this case, we really cannot take our eyes off of the pandemic. Again, Asia has been relatively fortunate to keep this under control, but really the trust can only be built if the pandemic can be contained, and then economic recovery be built on top of it. And I also hope that leaders will be courageous enough to invest sufficiently and in a timely manner so that economic recovery can be maximized, because all of the Asia region has had past experiences where perhaps timing was a little bit slow in investment in recovery. And Japan can learn from its experiences in the 1990s. The region experienced again a crisis in 97, and of course the more recent 2008 crisis, where for some countries really hesitated to sufficiently invest in that recovery. And on top of that, we can then build mutual trust. So thank you again for this opportunity to join all of you in discussing what can be better for the future of Asia and the world.
Thank you, Kay. And Eugene, your final thoughts?
Sure. Again, I truly appreciate CGTN's efforts to organize this kind of wonderful TV forum. I was delighted to join the discussion. Here in East Asia, of course, the three countries, and not only three countries, all the members of the region has experienced the wax and wane of the relationship. Our history has been 1,000 years, not only just decades. So what we see today is only probably a piece of a longer term and a bigger picture. So I truly want to highlight that we definitely need to take care of our people and the space where we live today and our descendants will live. The space is so precious for everyone of this region. So that will be my concluding remark. Again, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Facing an uncertain world, visions from China, South Korea, and Japan are even more relevant than ever before, because what they will do, whether they will cooperate and how, will probably decide the contours of the global economy in the coming decade. And thank you for joining us on this year's TV Forum for the Vision for China, ROK, and Japan Trilateral Cooperation. And our thanks also go to the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. Thank you for our panelists and guests. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.